For clout-chasers stormed the tomb of the unknown soldier to harass the female sentinel. They thought she was just a prop for their viral video. They were dead wrong. The autumn afternoon air over Arlington National Cemetery hung thick with a sacred silence, a quiet so profound it felt like a physical presence. Sunlight, crisp and golden, slanted across the pristine white marble of the amphitheater, casting long, somber shadows that stretched like fingers across the manicured lawns. Each of the thousands of identical headstones stood in perfect, silent formation, a testament to discipline even in death. This wasn't a place of noise. It was a place of echoes, where the whispers of tourists and the distant, mournful notes of a lone bugle practicing taps were the only sounds to breach the reverence. At the center of this hallowed ground, on the plaza of the tomb of the unknown soldier, Sergeant Eva Rostova stood guard. She was a statue carved from duty, her form as rigid and unyielding as the marble beneath her feet. Her U.S. Army service uniform, the iconic dress blues of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, was immaculate. The buttons on her tunic gleamed, her white gloves were spotless, and the brim of her combination cap sat perfectly level, shading eyes that saw everything and nothing at once. Her M14 rifle, with its polished wood stock and gleaming bayonet, rested on her shoulder, not as a weapon, but as an extension of her unwavering resolve. To the small crowd of onlookers huddled behind the stanchion chains, she was a symbol, a piece of living history performing a ritual unchanged for decades. But Eva Rostova was not a statue. Beneath the flawless uniform and the ceremonial stillness was a 30-year-old combat veteran. The discipline that kept her motionless for 21-minute intervals wasn't born on a parade ground. It was forged in the dust and chaos of Kandahar. She remembered holding overwatch from a rooftop, the Afghan sun beating down, her body screaming for relief, yet remaining perfectly still for hours because a platoon of her brothers was depending on her eyes. She'd learned then that true discipline wasn't about looking good for a crowd. It was about controlling every muscle, every breath, every flicker of thought when lives were on the line. The stillness was a weapon, a shield, a promise. Today, however, her honed instincts were detecting a discordant note in the symphony of reverence. For young men, detached from the respectful clusters of families and veterans, had positioned themselves near the edge of the plaza. They weren't dressed for a pilgrimage. They wore expensive, baggy streetwear and brand new sneakers that seemed to scuff the sacred ground with every shift of their weight. They carried not flowers, but phone gimbals and GoPros, their lenses scanning the scene not with awe, but with a predatory calculation. They weren't looking at the tomb. They were looking at her. They whispered to each other, not with the hushed tones of the other visitors, but with the conspiratorial excitement of hyenas closing in on a target. Eva recognized the pattern. It was the same energy she'd seen in insurgents before an ambush, the feigned casualness, the coordinated positioning, the utter lack of respect for their surroundings. These weren't mourners or tourists. They were trouble. As Eva began her slow, deliberate 21-step march across the plaza, the contrast between reverence and irreverence sharpened. Near the chains, an elderly man in a Vietnam veteran cap stood with his grandson. He gently removed his own hat as Eva passed, placing a hand over his heart. "See, Michael," he whispered to the boy, "that's honor." She walks 21 steps. It symbolizes the 21-gun salute, the highest honor our country can give. The boy watched, his eyes wide with a dawning understanding. They were witnesses to a sacred trust. The four men, however, saw only an opportunity. As Eva completed her turn and faced the tomb, they made their move. The leader, a tall man with a smug grin and a camera strapped to his chest, took a small, tarnished medal from his pocket. It wasn't a real military decoration. It was a cheap prop. He made a show of fumbling with it, then deliberately tossed it under the chain, where it landed a few feet inside the restricted area. "Whoops," he said, his voice loud enough to shatter the quiet. He looked directly at Eva, a mocking challenge in his eyes. "Hey, soldier girl, mind if I grab that? Drop my grandpa's medal. Means a lot." Eva remained silent, motionless, her gaze fixed forward. Protocol was absolute. She could not engage. Her silence, meant to convey the dignity of her post, was misinterpreted by the man as weakness, as permission. He smirked at his friends, who had their phones up and recording. Guess that's a yes. He ducked under the chain. That was the signal. The instant his feet touched the hallowed marble of the plaza, the other three swarmed in. They didn't run. They moved with a practiced, deliberate speed, fanning out to surround her. One came from her left, one from her right, while the fourth, the youngest, circled around to her flank. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The veteran instinctively pulled his grandson behind him. A woman shrieked, her phone clattering onto the pavement. The sacred space had been violated. They moved in, their goal clear, to break the statue, to humiliate the symbol, to capture a viral moment of desecration for their audience. They thought they were attacking a ceremony. They were about to discover they had just ambushed a soldier. In the split second the perimeter was breached, Eva's mind didn't panic. It calculated. The ceremonial guard persona dissolved, replaced by the tactical awareness of Sergeant Rostova. For hostiles, coordinated attack, civilian presence. Primary objective, protect the tomb. Secondary objective, neutralize the threat with minimal, precise force. The first attacker, the one who had crossed to her right, lunged for her, his hands reaching out to shove her, to break her perfect posture. He expected a rigid, unmoving target. Instead, Eva executed a subtle but powerful pivot on her left heel. It was a move of pure economy. She didn't step away. She simply shifted her center of gravity. The man's momentum, intended to topple her, carried him harmlessly past. He stumbled, his arms flailing, his confident charge ending in an undignified sprawl on the marble. Simultaneously, the attacker on her left tried to grab her combination cap, a symbolic act of disrespect. He never got close. Without turning her head, Eva drove her left elbow backward in a short, brutal arc. The strike was precise, landing squarely in his solar plexus. The air exploded from his lungs in a choked gasp. He doubled over, his face a mask of shock and pain, his viral ambitions instantly forgotten. The third, the younger one, went low, attempting a clumsy tackle to take out her legs. He wrapped his arms around her thighs, expecting to bring her down like a felled tree. He hadn't accounted for a soldier's core strength. Eva's legs remained planted as if rooted to the ground. She dropped her center of gravity, then used his own grip and upward momentum against him. With a powerful twist of her hips, she spun, leveraging his body weight. He was thrown off balance, his grip broken, and he tumbled sideways, landing hard on his shoulder. 3 down in less than 3 seconds. The crowd was frozen in a state of stunned disbelief. The Vietnam veteran's jaw was slack. "My God," he breathed. "That's not a drill." But the fourth man, the leader with the chest-mounted camera, made the ultimate mistake. He saw his friends neutralized and, in a surge of foolish bravado, he reached for Eva's M14 rifle. That was the final line. The weapon wasn't just a part of the uniform. It was a symbol of the unyielding defense of the unknowns. Touching it was an act of sacrilege. Eva's response was instantaneous and absolute. She pivoted, bringing the rifle off her shoulder in a fluid, controlled motion. It wasn't a wild swing. It was a textbook but stroke. The heavy steel butt plate of the M14 met the man's extended forearm with a sickening, definitive crack that echoed across the silent plaza. He screamed, a raw, high-pitched sound of agony, and recoiled, clutching his shattered arm, his face contorted in a mixture of pain and utter shock. His camera, still recording, now pointed uselessly at the sky. What the clout-chasers and the tourists didn't know was that Eva was never truly alone. The tomb of the unknown soldier is one of the most closely monitored places in the nation. The moment the first man's foot crossed the chain, silent alarms had blared in a command center buried deep within the Arlington grounds. Motion sensors, pressure plates on the plaza, and high-resolution cameras hidden in the architecture had tracked the entire event, feeding live data to the tomb guard's command staff. The on-duty commander hadn't even needed to give the order. The response protocol was automatic, triggered by the breach and the aggressive, multi-subject approach. The system had already identified the threat, analyzed its nature, and deployed the countermeasure. From a discreet door in the side of the memorial amphitheater, a door most visitors never even notice, the response team emerged. They were 4 soldiers from the old guard, dressed in army combat uniforms and tactical vests. They moved not with the ceremonial grace of the tomb guard, but with the explosive, purposeful speed of an infantry fire team. They fanned out, their M4 carbines held at a low ready, their movements a symphony of professional violence. There was no shouting, no hesitation. They were a force of nature. The leader of the response team, a staff sergeant with eyes as hard as granite, took in the scene in a single glance. For subdued hostiles, 1 standing sentinel, a shocked crowd. His team acted as one. 2 of them were on the man with the broken arm, expertly securing him with zip-tie cuffs while avoiding further injury. Another officer intercepted the one who had been elbowed, who was still trying to catch his breath, and put him on the ground with quiet efficiency. The other 2 were rounded up just as quickly. From the first man crossing the chain to the last zip tie being pulled tight, less than 30 seconds had passed. 30 seconds of chaos, followed by the swift, overwhelming imposition of order. The entire, pathetic attempt at viral fame had been snuffed out with surgical precision. The message was clear and absolute. This ground was not a stage, and its guardians were not props. In the wake of the silent, swift storm, a new quiet fell over the plaza. It was different from the reverent silence before. This was a quiet of awe, of shock, of a fundamental understanding that had been irrevocably altered. The 4 disruptors were being efficiently escorted away, their bravado replaced by the humiliating reality of their failure. Their cameras were now evidence. And in the center of it all stood Sergeant Eva Rostova. Her uniform was no longer pristine. A smudge of dirt marked her left knee, and a tiny, crimson scratch was visible on her cheekbone where a flailing hand had grazed her. Her cap was tilted just a fraction of a degree, but she was standing. She calmly brought her M14 rifle back to her shoulder, took 1 precise step back to her original mark, and resumed her post. Her eyes were once again fixed forward, her body a statue of unyielding duty. The brief, violent interruption was over. The vigil continued. The crowd stared, their phones mostly lowered. They weren't just looking at a soldier anymore. They were looking at a protector, a warrior who had met a profane challenge with sacred duty. The video being captured now wasn't of a prank, but of resilience. Then, a small movement broke the spell. The little boy, Michael, the veteran's grandson, slipped away from his grandfather's protective grip. He walked slowly, hesitantly, to the edge of the stanchion chain. He looked up at the lone, still figure of Sergeant Rostova. He saw the scratch on her cheek, the dirt on her uniform, and the unwavering strength in her posture. He was too young to understand tactics or combat, but he understood courage when he saw it. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his small right hand to his forehead in a salute. It was clumsy, his fingers splayed, but it was earnest. It was pure. Eva could not move. She could not speak. She could not return the salute. The protocol was absolute. But for a fleeting instant, to anyone watching closely enough, there was a change. The steel in her eyes seemed to soften, just for a moment. A flicker of acknowledgement, of shared respect, passed between the warrior and the child. It was more powerful than any word she could have spoken. The veteran grandfather put a hand on the boy's shoulder, his own eyes misty. He gave a slow, knowing nod, a silent message of gratitude from one generation of soldier to another. The video, of course, went viral, but not in the way the 4 clout-chasers had hoped. Their own footage, confiscated as evidence, was eventually released by authorities, and it played alongside dozens of clips from tourist phones. The narrative wasn't about a prank. It was about the desecration of sacred ground and the quiet, formidable strength of the woman who guarded it. News outlets picked up the story, not as a curiosity, but as a commentary on a society where the quest for online fame had collided with something timeless and real. Sergeant Rostova's name was never officially released, but she became an anonymous symbol of honor in a world that often seemed to have forgotten its meaning. As dusk settled over Arlington, casting the cemetery in hues of orange and purple, Eva was relieved from her post. Walking back to the barracks, the adrenaline finally fading, she felt no triumph. There was no pride in what she had done, only the quiet, bone-deep satisfaction of a duty performed. Her thoughts were not on the 4 foolish men, but on the unknowns who rested in eternal silence behind her. She had kept the peace for them. She had held the line. Tomorrow, she would be back on the plaza, her uniform immaculate once more, her movements precise, her vigil unbroken. The cycle would continue, but something had shifted in the public consciousness. The understanding of what it meant to be a tomb guard had been seared into the minds of millions. It was not a performance. It was a promise, backed by the skill and resolve of a real American soldier. So, we're left with this. What does it say about our culture when sacred duties are seen as content opportunities? And how do we properly honor the quiet professionals like Sergeant Rostova who stand guard over the things we hold most dear? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Please, comment with respect. If this story gave you a new appreciation for the men and women of the old guard, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of quiet courage. Share this video so everyone can see what true strength and discipline look like. The vigil at the tomb is eternal, and the soldiers who keep it deserve nothing less than our deepest respect.